Thousands of stressed out college students live in Columbia, Missouri, and according to the CDC, one of the best ways to deal with stress is, among other things, exercising regularly. Of course, Mizzou students have the Mizzou Rec available to them, but it may be nice to change the scenery up a bit sometimes. And no, I'm not just talking about going to a different gym. Columbia has a variety of different trails that many locals use for walking, running, biking, hiking. Many Mizzou students may be familiar with the MKT, as one of its trailheads is right near campus in downtown Columbia.
I'd say we use the MKT Trail the most. We go on walks together, but I go on bike rides by myself, usually like a few times a week when the weather's nice.
But what about the others? Columbia has a number of different trails and paths to offer. Some paved, some gravel, some shorter, some longer. Of course, there are some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut for this video, like the Scotts Branch Trail, the Hominy Creek Trail, and more. Today, we'll be focusing on just 4 main trails in or around Columbia: the Hinkson Creek Trail, the Bear Creek Trail, the Katy Trail, and the MKT. Of these 4 trails, the Hinkson Creek Trail is one of the more minor ones in Columbia, but it clearly still has enough significance to be mentioned. Running from the MKT to the Columbia Country Club just north of Stevens Lake Park, the Hinkson Creek Trail stretches about 7.5 miles in total. It's a bit choppy, as parts of the Hinkson Creek Trail are shared with other trails like the MU Rec Trail and the Grindstone Creek Trail. Also, along Old US 63 South, the trail becomes sidewalk for a little over a mile. But it has plenty of diversity to offer for its relatively short distance. From gravel paths in the middle of the woods, to bridges, to the paved path in Stevens Lake Park, the Hinkson Creek Trail is honestly a trail that more MU students should be aware of, especially considering that there is a trailhead for it right by the Mizzou College of Veterinary Medicine.
Yes, the Hinkson Creek Trail, I do use that.
And then there's obviously like Rockbridge State Park and like Stevens Lake.
The second and last of the more minor trails is the Bear Creek Trail. It's even shorter than Hinkson Creek, running 4.8 miles in total. It's also less complicated per se, as it runs in one piece without disconnection. It goes between 2 parks north of downtown Columbia, the Columbia Cosmopolitan Recreation Area and Albert Oakland Park. Trailgoers are right beside Bear Creek itself for most of the length of the trail, and other areas can be seen along the way as well, like the Garth Nature area. It may be the shortest path featured in this video, but its small size likely leads to less traffic. The Bear Creek Trail, at least in my experience, is hardly ever busy. In fact, it's sometimes harder to find anyone at all. So, if you're looking for a short but peaceful trail retreat not too far from downtown Columbia, the Bear Creek Trail may be just right. Okay, so now we move on to the stars of Columbia's trail scene. Yeah, all of Columbia's trails in the Parks and Rec system are important and provide trail diversity, if you will, but it's hard to compare any trails in central Missouri to the MKT or the Katy Trail. To begin with, the Katy Trail technically doesn't run through Columbia, but it's only about a 20-minute drive to get there, and being probably the most major trail in all of Missouri as a whole, it was really hard not to mention. The Katy Trail runs 237 miles in total, making it not the longest in the state, as that title goes to the Ozark Trail, which contains over 350 miles of trail in total. However, the Katy Trail's distance is stretched out across almost the entire width of the state, running from St. Louis all the way to Clinton, Missouri, which is just about 50 miles from the border with Kansas. If you're going on, say, a major bike ride across Missouri, the Katy Trail is really the main way to go. Much of the trail's path lies along the same path that Lewis and Clark took on their famous expedition across the country. So, if you're going on your own expedition today, you should be grateful that at least there's a designated path to help you out now. This is what makes it, in my opinion, the most important trail in all of Missouri. Plus, there's lots of cool cliffs, rock formations, and neat tunnels along the way. It feels almost as if you're somewhere in the mountains out west, not in the middle of Missouri. It's also part of the Rails to Trails Conservancy, an organization that is striving for a nation where trails connect everyone everywhere. The organization itself, though, is the main voice of the Rail Trail movement, which started back in the 1980s. The nationwide movement, which pushed for abandoned railroads across the entire US to be transformed into usable nature trails, came at a time where many railroads were starting to be left behind due to something called the Staggers Rail Act of 1980. Basically, this act made all hell break loose in the railroad industry. According to the Department of Transportation, smaller railroad companies now didn't get as much funding to stay active, the industry became more competitive based on what rates were to keep railroads running, and so many railroads were left behind in the process. Additionally, there was other help provided for trail advocates at the federal level too, like when President Ronald Reagan signed the National Trail System Improvement Act of 1988. This protected the abandoned railroad's rights of way to becoming trails and also just sought to bring more publicity to the country's trails, no matter how big or small. Today, the Katy Trail is the largest rails-to-trails project in the country. Remnants of the old railroad that used to run the same path as today's trail can be seen all along the way, whether this is through old railroad cars, tracks, or even previously operating stations. History can be found on what seems like almost every mile of the trail. But what was the actual railroad that used to run this path? The answer, the MKT rail line. The MKT, or the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Rail Line, was established in 1865 and would eventually become a major rail system running throughout these 3 states, plus Oklahoma. For a while, it was just referred to as the KT, and that is where the Katy Trail comes from today. It's just like a nickname. The MKT rail line would last and be highly practical for over 100 years. By the 1970s, almost 4,000 miles of rail were a part of the MKT system. However, events previously mentioned from the 80s caused the system to lose much of its traffic, and it began seeking a merger. So today, the rail system is a part of the Union Pacific Railroad system, but the path of the old railway, at least in Missouri, has undergone the Rails to Trails program, and that gets us to where we are today. Enough talk about the MKT Railroad. What about the MKT path? The one we already mentioned at the beginning of this video starts in downtown Columbia and many Mizzou students frequent. Starting with phase 1 of development in 1982, the trail took almost 2 decades to fully construct, being completed in November 2001 with the conclusion of the 3rd and final phase. Today, the MKT runs 8.9 miles from Columbia down to the Katy Trail.
It's nice because you can go like out as far as you want and come back, and there's always just something cool to see.
This, as you may notice, makes it only about 1.5 miles longer than the Hinkson Creek Trail. So what makes it so much more significant? It, like the Katy Trail, lies on the former grounds of a branch of the MKT rail line. After all, it would be pretty silly to name it the MKT Trail if it wasn't formally a part of the MKT rail. But this trail has more to it than just its name. In 2016, for example, it ranked 2nd in the nation for Best Urban Trail in the USA Today's 10 Best Readers' Choice Awards. Plus, the MKT has a ton of amenities and stops to offer along its path. Skate parks, playgrounds, water fountains, benches. It's probably safe to say that the MKT is well prepared to accommodate a lot of people, not only because of this, but also because of its 10-foot width. It's like the 8-lane highway in the world of trails. One group at Mizzou that uses the MKT a lot is the Running Club.
Every week, Monday through Friday, we'll meet at Sinkowski, and we'll usually just run on the MKT Trail, and then we'll go to like track meets and cross-country meets in the fall.
Runners in the club can run as much or as little as they want. After all, that's what makes it a club.
Some people just come a few days a week just to run and hang out with friends, and it's more just like a social thing, which is totally cool. I mean, it's a run club. You can do what you want.
Soft surfaces like gravel are popular with runners in general due to it being less strenuous on the body than running on pavement all the time, for example. With the MKT having very little paved portions, runners on MU's Run Club rarely find themselves running anywhere else.
We run the MKT quite a bit. Every once in a while we'll run like Stevens Lake if it's like bad weather or something, and I guess occasionally we'll go on the Hinkson Trail, like MU Rec Trail, but we do a lot on the MKT. Probably too much, but it's a good trail.
It's a very convenient trail for runners like Griffith for many reasons besides this, too. Of course, it's really close to campus, and as mentioned, the trail provides numerous amenities, some of which can help out during runs.
It's always convenient. They maintain the bathrooms very well, so it's always nice if you need it.
And it also runs the entire 8.9 miles without crossing a single road. Every road it passes, there's a tunnel, making the MKT a smooth-flowing, non-stop path for especially dedicated runners and bikers that aren't looking to stop and cross a crosswalk every other mile.
I think I'm more of the training type who wants to set some new PRs, and I've done like up to 80 miles in a week, and I'll do all the Tuesday, Thursday workouts, and I'll go to as many meets as I can, so yeah.
With spring upon us and summer to come, there's no better time to get out on Columbia's trails. Have a final coming up that you're stressing out about? Of course you should study, but take a 30-minute break and go for a relaxing walk on the MKT. In the long run, this helps you stay even more focused on your studies. The weather's getting nicer and nicer? Take advantage and clear up an afternoon to go exploring on some trails you may not have been to before. Columbia's trails are everywhere around the city, and although they can help to escape the stresses of everyday life, they shouldn't just be looked at as an escape from everything. In fact, it's almost as if the trails intertwine to hold the city together. So put on some good shoes or go out on your bike and see what you might find. Like the Rails to Trails Conservancy said, we need a nation with trails that can connect everyone everywhere. But that's only possible if you're involved with that journey.